Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to this session of The Living Room. It's lovely to have you with us. And I'm really excited to have Heather presenting. I've known Heather for years. I can't even remember, Heather, exactly when it was that we met, but I think I remember maybe you and Dave. Maybe was it even your first time? I don't know, coming to church at Des
Oh,
Moines.
yes.
You guys came over to our house for lunch anyway.
Yeah, it probably was in 2013, I think, because that
Yeah.
was the year before we moved to college. Yeah.
Yeah. So very cool. And I've, yes, loved Heather and Dave ever since I met them. So I'm just going to pray as we start, and then Heather, I'm going to ask a few intro questions just so that we can get to know you a bit better, and then we're going to head into the topic that we're going to look at tonight, which is in a sense how to be sharing the gospel with university students. We're going to be hearing about your ministry and kind of trying to understand where they're coming from, what's important to them, what kinds of questions are they asking, and how we can connect well with them as we seek to introduce them to Jesus. So let me
quick. Can I ask just a dumb
start.
question, Anna?
Yes, you can.
Because I actually got on by looking at it at email from 2024.
Yep.
Was there an email sent out in follow up with the tickets for this one? Sharon, did you find an email? How did you get in?
I couldn't find my email, and Heather sent me the link, but I actually went back to the original email from the ministry women's thing and registered, and it then resent me the tickets and told me that I had registered already.
Okay. So the
Okay.
tickets actually have it on there, does it?
Yeah, that's right. So that's my understanding, Sheree, is that when you register, Tribe Booking should send you, I'm hoping it does. That's what I thought it sends you the link as part of your registration.
On the ticket.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I didn't that looked like it was contacting the event organizer, so I didn't do that one. That's all right. I'll keep quiet.
Yeah, no worries at all. Let me pray as we start. Father God, I just want to really commit our time to you this evening, Father. Thank you so much for Jesus. Thanks for just the wonder of him. Thank you that in him is life and life to the full. And thank you, Lord, that you invite us to partner with you in bringing people to know Jesus and to come under his love and care. Father, thanks that Heather is someone who loves you and loves to share you with people. And I just want to pray that you would really help us tonight, help us to listen and learn well. And pray that our hearts would just be encouraged as we think about what it is to connect well with young people and how to introduce them to Jesus. So I pray you'd be with Heather, pray you'd help her to think clearly. And I pray that this time would honour you, as we think and learn together today. Amen. So, Heather, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Who's in your family, where you go to church?
Yeah, so I'm married to Dave. We are at Albury Presbyterian churches down in Albury. The actual congregation we're part of is Church at 9. Dave's the pastor there. Thanks, Sharon. Dave's the pastor there. And we also have children, Eleanor, who's 14, and Isaac, who's 12. So older kids these days. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Often, like, you kind of think, my children are small, and then you look and you think, they're not quite as small as they used to be.
Yeah, that's right.
So how did you come to know Jesus, Heather?
Well, my family took us to church each week when I was growing up. We grew up on a farm in a very small community, or near a small community. And I think, it was actually that commitment each week, probably I first encountered Jesus through that. But most particularly when I was in year 7, I remember going on a camp for youth in our area. It was a crazy thing, like nobody would do it these days, but like river camp, we had like 150 teenagers camping on the banks of the Murrumbidgee River. That would never happen these days. But the speaker there talked about how we actually couldn't meet God's standards for his perfection and love, and yet he provided Jesus as a sacrifice for our sins. That clicked for the first time. So I became a Christian on the banks of the Murrumbidgee River. And that was exciting, because before that I had been quite moralistic about being good, but I'd never really understood grace until that point.
That's a good story. I mean, obviously, every story where people come to know Jesus is great.
Yeah.
I just felt that's so fitting for you, Heather, that you came
Yeah.
to know Jesus in the outdoors.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what would we find you doing if you were enjoying a perfect day off, Heather?
Oh, well, I do love the outdoors, as Anna has mentioned. So yeah, probably going for a walk, maybe spending some time in my garden, particularly at this time of year. Often Dave and I try and grab a coffee on a nice day off, somewhere nice. And Albury has a lot of lovely places to explore. Also at this time of year, or just in like a little while time, it's actually really nice to go to the snow as it's melting, and you can go on hiking trails, but in the beautiful snow areas. And there's often quite a lot of snow around still, which is nice.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to pop in a few of my would you rather questions,
Oh,
Heather.
yes.
I'm going to ask that final question about, what got you interested in your ministry.
Yeah.
That's probably a better segue. So, a couple of little off the cuff that you haven't heard yet, would you rather questions. So, would you rather give up coffee forever or chocolate forever?
Coffee. I could probably go without coffee, but
Okay, yep, going to keep the
keep
chocolate.
chocolate, thank you.
Would you rather have a holiday in the mountains or by the ocean?
Oh, because I live near the mountains, I'd go ocean. I
Okay.
do like being warm in winter, which you can do in northern New South Wales. You cannot do that in Albury in winter.
Yeah. Would you rather watch a romantic comedy, a thriller, or an action movie?
Oh, action movie? Generally? Yes.
Excellent. I think I probably agree.
Yep. No thrillers, thanks.
Would you rather have an afternoon like surrounded by people or on your own, being quiet?
Oh, do you know, I find that really tricky because let's go with people. That would
Okay.
be my normal.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, but it is tricky.
I wrote that one down. I was thinking that
Too
is
much.
actually really hard, right? Because depending on your mood,
Yeah, it does.
you can actually really pick either.
Yeah.
And I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. Would you prefer a night in a tent or in a fancy hotel?
Oh, actually, well, they're good in their way, but I do actually like tents. Go for a tent. And I feel like it is. That's like a fancy hotel. The
Can have
views
the
are
best of
great.
both worlds as well. And would you rather own a cat or a dog?
Neither, please.
Oh,
Can I
really?
be-
Neither. What would be your preferred animal?
I prefer my animals wild.
Yes, okay, not domestic. Neither.
Domestic, yeah. Probably if I had to, I'd probably go a dog, but I am quite allergic to cats and allergic
Yeah,
to me. So
there you
yeah.
go. So animals wild. That's
Yeah.
good. And
Yeah.
do you prefer summer or winter?
Oh, I love seasons. I love them all. I
Yeah,
really do.
hard to
Winter
pick.
can get cold and dreary at times, but I actually do love them all. So probably summer, but if I had to choose, but
That's the thing, right? It's so hard to pick.
yeah.
So, and now I'm back to the question about uni. So can you tell us what got you interested in doing ministry with university students, Heather?
Well, I guess I'm a result of uni ministry in a way. So even though I became a Christian when I was about 12, and the high school years, there was no time during that I wasn't a follower of Jesus in a real kind of sense. I didn't grow a lot during that time. My church was very small. So we had about 15 to 20 people at my church. So my family was 5 of them. So it was very small. And so the sense of being able to be encouraged by others and growing together, I didn't get a lot of that in those years. But as soon as I got to uni, I met people who loved Jesus, who wanted to grow in him, who wanted to serve him, who taught me what that looked like. So I was very much just swept away by the wonder of Jesus at uni. So it was a foundational time for my own growth in Jesus. So, and ever since uni, and that's where I met Dave. So we were in that together, in that foundational time of being grounded in our faith and learning what ministry is like. And that was the first time I'd probably encountered steady, solid Bible teaching. And I was equipped to read the Bible for myself. I was also trained to be able to teach it to others over the time that I was there. So we've always been super encouraged by the fact that uni ministry exists, and we've always supported it. So fast forward, nearly 20 years, and we have been supporting uni ministries for all of that time, really, in various ways. Some of our friends have been trained through uni ministries, and some of them have gone on to be staff workers on campuses all over Australia. But we took a different path ourselves, and Dave ended up in church ministry. So when he heard from a colleague a few years ago that his colleague had been helping out the student group that was struggling a bit after COVID, and his colleague was pondering, I wonder whether we need to have a staff worker here again. There'd been a big gap. The previous staff worker had left about 7 years before that point. So they were looking for someone who might be able to do a role part-time, who might be willing to work with a very small group of students, because I'll explain a little bit more about our context here, but they were hoping for someone to do that. And it's kind of tricky to have people move to town for a part-time position. So they were looking a little bit locally, and Dave immediately said, Heather will do that. So basically he dobbed me in, and I was thrilled. Like, I actually was really delighted that I had not considered it before. And I was delighted that he mentioned my name. And so from there went through the interview process and so on. And so about 3 years ago, I started in the role here at Albury as the AFES, so the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Students staff worker. Yep.
That's so encouraging. It's like the job found you, Heather.
Oh, it really did. Yeah.
So encouraging. So over to you, Heather, if you want to sort of start, and I've got some questions that I'll ask as we go as well. But
yeah, that's great. Thanks, Anna. Well, I'm super encouraged that you guys are here. And that many will watch this probably online later. So a shout out to those who are doing that. And you probably come because you have some young people in your lives that you might be thinking of people in your churches who you'd like to serve, or you'd like to see in your churches because you're seeing them in your communities, and you'd like to know how your churches could support and serve them better. And it's kind of interesting because of the situation I'm in, where I'm highly involved in my church and I'm also on campus. I see a bit of both, what's happening in both contexts. So I'm hoping something of what I say is helpful for that. So and the question we're basically asking is, how can we equip and serve the next generation so that they can proclaim Jesus and so on? If anyone is willing to share, like, something about the young adults they have in their context, or they're thinking about as they come to this topic, I'd be really happy to hear from any of you if you're happy to share, just so we can kind of be thinking about this together.
I can go. I'm in a small congregation, but we do have young people, some in high school, some a little bit past high school, and just have young adult children, and just wanting to make sure I'm engaging with them. So I suppose it's for me, it's family, but also in my church context. I mean, we've got a very active youth group, but it's just that, I suppose, the challenge our church may be facing is those young adults that need more than just an adult Bible study during the week. What can we be offering them? Because some people are not up to that kind of level. Other people are embracing it big time. And obviously the ones that are more academic minded are the ones that are at uni church. So I hear they're having support in that direction as well. That's what we call CF group. Or our CF group has a community, a meeting. And so, and the 10:30, our 10:30 congregation is bigger and has a lot of those people, and they do get together and do stuff themselves. But for those that don't link in with the mainstream, how can we be connecting with them and keeping them connected so that they get the opportunity to learn more about what living for Jesus means?
Yeah, they're great aims. Yep. Great questions. Excellent. Yep. I think I'll address some of them, so that's a bit of a relief. Yeah. Any other contexts? Have you got anyone in mind, Anna?
I think for me, It's interesting actually, as I think about this season of my life, I'm not involved in, ministry as such to people of kind of young people, like the kind of uni age. But I've certainly I've got two daughters who like one's about to finish, the HSC in a couple of weeks' time, and my other daughter is in university. And it's been interesting actually getting to know their friends
Mm.
as well. Like our family has a holiday house down the coast. So we often have we found ourselves, which has been really nice, kind of down on holiday with a bunch of their friends who actually are kind of a mixture actually of Christian kids and non-Christian, and often kind of just around the campfire. And so that's
Mm.
interesting, like just kind of hearing from them. Like just, what's important, what they're thinking about, what are their questions. So I think that's for me, probably personally, it's thinking about my own kids and their friends. I think that's probably the main context for me at the moment. Yeah.
Well, that's really valuable. Like that personal connection that will come up as we're chatting, that personal connection is really important for that generation, I think. Very, very much so. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I might just move on. So just some context. So my church, so Church at 9, part of the Albury Presbyterian Churches Network, is a very cross-generational church. We have 0 to 97, I think, in our church in terms of age range. So it's huge. But even so, and I wouldn't say we're a very dynamic church in some respects. It's certainly not. We have hymns. Some things of church it has been a bit smaller and weaker in the last few years. So we're kind of growing very slowly. However, we still have people, and we'll be mentioning some of their stories, wandering into church from these young adult range of ages. Some stick, some don't. But it's fascinating that's not the thing that people are choosing church about whether that fits exactly what they want. So I'm finding that an interesting thing. So that's a church context. The uni context I can probably actually share some photos. So the uni context is quite interesting. We have two university campuses in Albury-Wodonga. So Charles Sturt University is the campus on the Albury side, and on the Wodonga side, there's a La Trobe campus. So La Trobe is a university mainly based in Melbourne, but also has some regional campuses across Victoria. Both of the campuses combined probably have a student face-to-face population of about 1,500 students. So we're not talking massive. This is quite small. Also, the foot traffic is not very much because they don't always have all of their classes on face-to-face. So some students might have 2 classes face-to-face and 2 online. So they're only really needing to come to campus 1 or 2 days a week. So we have a lot of commuters. So commuters, well, we call them commuters in the country, but they're driving you in an hour and a half, maybe from another town to come to uni, and then they'll go home again because they don't want the expense of moving. So the group that has been on campus, it's actually been a student-run student group, like student Christian group, since I was a student. So Albury has had uni Bible study happening in Albury for well over 20 years, and I'm not exactly sure when it kicked off formally, but it's certainly been happening during that whole time. I'll share some photos of what we've been up to this year, just to give you a bit of an idea. So this is some students who went to our mid-year conference this year. These are students from Albury, but we also joined with Orange, Bathurst and Wagga for mid-year conference. There was a bit of this was down near Albury, so some actually went up to the snow for free time one day, singing in a group. So this is the students praying. Shots of that. Back on campus, this is open day. So our student group is a club of the uni. So we have a chance at open day to talk to prospective parents and students. So that's good fun. The students love having a chance to talk to anyone who will talk to us. Quite a lot of people did our survey this year and took a Bible verse, and some interacted with that, which was quite good. And it's always interesting meeting students who are Christians, and they're so thrilled to find that there are Christians on campus. Oh, and this was us meeting the uni mascot. It's quite fun. We also had an event a few weeks ago, just before the uni break, the uni mid-session break, where we had a local pastor spoke. We had about 22 students there. So for us, that was pretty good. 6 to 8 non-Christians came along, invited by their friends. So that's the kind of, so I would say in general, we are a fairly small group. This is pretty typical of a uni Bible study gathering. 12 to 14 students this year, which is actually bigger than it has been in the past. But they are pretty committed to meeting together, and many of those students are there every week. So it's a pretty exciting, in that sense, it's a pretty exciting ministry to be a part of. And there's students from across La Trobe, CSU, we meet at CSU because it's the biggest of the campuses, but there's also TAFE students in that group. So about 4 of the students there are doing apprenticeships or doing TAFE online or face-to-face in town. So that's a little bit about the context I'm in. So my goal for the next little while is to talk, Anna's going to ask me some questions about things that we were thrashing out together. But my goal, I think, ultimately is that we're encouraged that Jesus is working in this generation. And my goal is that we lift our eyes to the fields and that we see that even the small interactions we have with young adults can be actually super helpful and important in helping them to put down firm, solid roots in their faith, no matter where that's at, because there's lots of stories of young people exploring spiritual things these days. So, yeah.
Excellent. So
Yeah.
thanks so much, Heather. Yeah, really lovely to see those photos too. That's really special. So just a question, I guess I've got just to open things up is I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I'm aware of fairly mixed messages around people's perceptions of Christianity. Like, I think there's messaging that says, you know, people are very hostile to Christianity, you know, we're no longer the good guys. There's a lot of, I guess, you know, judgment or critique around Christian worldview and our beliefs, you know, I guess around sexuality or gender. But then there's also, I'm hearing around the fact that there's kind of this, in some ways, a bit of a turn to Christianity. Like I don't know if you're aware that, you know, there are kind of these quite famous atheists, you know what I mean, that are starting to actually, and there's kind of a bit of a shift, you know, into thinking about spiritual things, and kind of in a sense that atheism that was kind of so popular about 20 years ago is actually proving to be, you know, quite hopeless. And so I feel like there's these messages of, you know, either people are kind of warming to Christianity or maybe they're more hostile. So that's where I'm kind of curious to ask is, what are you observing in terms of being on campus, talking to young people? Yeah, I'm sure there's a mix, but can you give us some thoughts on what you're finding in terms of people's openness or their hostility to things of Jesus and Christianity?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think there has been a significant shift in the last few years with students over the past few years. Students definitely are seeming more open to spiritual matters. They're not necessarily landing at Christianity with that, but they're certainly more open to engage with ideas than I think what I experienced as a student. I think a lot of people were much more hostile when I was a student a couple of decades ago. But so not many students would call themselves an out-and-out atheist these days. That would be actually, I would say, fairly rare. They may have other ways of describing themselves, but certainly the idea of there is nothing more than what I can see, touch, feel, that kind of idea is not appealing to them. So they probably don't express like that anymore. That would be pretty, yeah, unusual actually, I think. So yeah, so on campus, I think it looks like that the Christian students that I work with have more opportunities to talk with their non-Christian friends about spiritual things and more regularly than what you would imagine, which is pretty exciting. Often it's the non-Christians who will raise these things. That happens, my students tell me quite often. But I wouldn't actually say that that always brings a lot of fruit immediately, because what students are doing is they're holding these very, like you said, almost opposite worldviews together in a way where, because they don't have a firm view of what truth is, they're very happy to say, I think I can reconcile the fact that you think this and I think this, and they're opposites, and that's fine. I think they don't have a lot of deep thought about how that's probably not helpful or actually possible. So they're probably pretty happy as a whole to maintain pretty opposing views. So it actually takes a bit to tease out what someone's thinking is, because they're holding views that are quite opposite. Yeah, but one of the interesting things, and kind of related to this, is it's fascinating, I think, that the Christian students coming, I have to convince them that their friends are interested in spiritual things because they assume that they're not. So I think this is just for my own parenting of teenagers. I want to be careful that, even though I'm kind of wanting to say to my teenagers, right, like, to be, careful that there will be people who will oppose you and don't let that turn you away from Jesus. I want to say those things. I also want to be saying that, don't you realize the message we have is so good that your friends will want to hear it? Like, I kind of want to keep that, because I'm just noticing that it sometimes takes a lot of work for me to convince the Christian students that their friends are actually open, when their friends are clearly open, because they're telling me that they're always bringing up spiritual matters. So I'm like, can't you see that your friends are quite open to hearing about this? Yeah. So yeah, do you have a follow-up question from that, Emma?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just really interesting, is it? I mean, I'm really fascinated to hear that, because that I certainly grapple with that. Like, I feel like, yeah, there's just these different messages regarding, how non-Christians perceive Christians, and obviously there's a real variety. Another question I guess I've got, Heather, is what are you noticing about the kinds of, I guess, big questions, or are there sort of certain questions that are coming up for students that, you're kind of hearing, repeatedly? Are there kind of themes or issues that, you're kind of hearing and kind of then feeling like maybe you're wanting to be across that and having, particular responses that are thoughtful?
Yeah. Well, there are certain issues that I definitely need thoughtful responses on, because they come up. Matters of some of them are not surprising, matters of relationships and dating and things like that. Often Christian students will be very much wanting to have my ear, particularly the girls, on that. So I do need thoughtful responses on that. With the other things, when you're thinking about big questions, I thought about this, and I'm like, I'm actually not sure that there's a common thread of specific questions, particularly that non-Christians are asking. But what I think is the common thread is how they often search for the answers. So unsurprisingly for that generation, so I'm kind of talking about from 18 to 24, 25-year-olds maybe, they've searched for things with Google all their life, and they watch YouTube videos to learn everything. And that's no different to spiritual matters. They actually will definitely turn to YouTube. And you kind of go, that sounds scary. And yep, it sounds a bit scary, because there's a lot of very interesting, very wacky stuff on YouTube. But there is also some good stuff. And so it's interesting. I think a very important question to ask anyone who's got questions, or a young person you're engaging with, is what they've been listening to or watching. So they don't really listen to podcasts. They watch it on YouTube. So I have no idea how they have the time. But anyway, so knowing what channels they've been watching has been really helpful for informing me about the questions they're asking behind the questions they're asking. So occasionally they've stumbled across something great, and then they get chucked more stuff that's great. So that can be helpful. But of course, they also are very, I guess, mindful of the fact that it's just a guy on YouTube. So most of the time, they probably don't have the depth or the solid ground that we would hope for in anyone who's, relying on this for what they're trust in. So teaching them how to read the Bible well, it comes back to those Bible skills of teaching them how to read the Bible well for themselves. And then I've also noticed that they have a thirst for solid food and solid theology. So one of the things that has been well attended by the students this year has been once a term, I try and do a study at my house on doctrine. We eat dinner together. We actually usually do dumplings, and we study doctrine. So one topic of doctrine per night. Now you might go, whoa, that sounds huge. Doing one, they're quite large topics like the resurrection or the cross, like substitution, some of these kinds of ideas. And they are. It's pretty detailed and a pretty hard couple of hour session in doctrine for the night. But I think they really wrestle with the fact that otherwise they don't have much teaching in this. So yeah, so I've been found it quite encouraging that they're willing to go deep. I kind of advertise it as going deep, and they come. So that's very good. Yeah, so not really a specific set of questions that I've noticed. I also think that YouTube becomes more and more important the less education you have. So this is where I find it interesting between church and uni. So the students from that, sorry, not the students, the young people that we've noticed wandering into church, they're much more reliant on YouTube for their everything they know. So one young man came to church, just walked in one day, and in my "Hi, welcome to church" chat that I was having with him before church started, he told me that he'd become a Christian 2 weeks ago from watching YouTube. And in previous generations, I would have been quite skeptical about that. And previously I would have been quite skeptical, kind of knowing what could you possibly, like, how could that actually be the case? But Dave had a coffee with him later and did find out what some of the YouTube channels he'd been watching was, and they were pretty good. Like, they actually told the gospel clearly. They said what a Christian was. He understood it to some extent, but hadn't had a very, very much education. And there's obviously a lot of discipling between the point of saying, I trust Jesus, to knowing why church is important. So that young man didn't stick with us at church. We hope that we will see him again. But we've seen him at a couple of events. So we're just hoping that at some point he'll rock up again, or has attended another church. We're just not sure. So yeah, that's a really interesting one that, so asking what they're watching is great. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I'm just really feeling my age here by realizing, like, that's not something that I think I've been really aware of. And that's a really interesting thing, isn't it, to think about, is the impact then. Like,
Yeah.
if for a lot of young people, they're interacting maybe with these ideas for the first time on YouTube. Like, even just that's interesting, isn't it? Because if you think about YouTube, it's not interactional, like you're just absorbing. So that's interesting, isn't it? Think about, like, what are the impacts of that? And then when they actually come into an interactional context, like, I wonder whether, potentially for that young guy, like, in some ways he might be hungry for more, but I wonder whether there's something that's a bit uncomfortable as well, about actually now this is in real life, and like there is something very, I don't know, it's kind of, do you know what I mean? Like, it kind of is quite shielding, isn't it? Like, just to be kind of passively watching something on a screen versus I'm now meeting up for a coffee with someone. And like, that's just interesting, isn't it? To think about is some of those challenges there. That's fascinating.
And he was curious enough to type something in, like, what is a Christian? Like, into YouTube, you kind of go, that's great. Like,
Yeah,
that's an example of someone who's doing that.
that's so
I've
interesting.
also wondered with guys like him whether, the typical for Dave would be to go to a coffee shop. But I actually think that, and sometimes for me on campus, we do have a uni cafe space, which is actually more like a common room. So that's quite neutral ground because all the students from campus feel that's their space. But for a guy like the young man that walked in, I reckon Macca's would have been a better option.
Yeah.
Like, do you know, like, he was young, and I just don't think that a coffee shop was the space. But
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
that's a thought of mine afterwards, and you never think about this in the
Yeah, that's
scheme of
right.
things. But yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, such interesting questions, aren't they, to think about. So, Heather, could you maybe share with us a few, like, that was really lovely to hear that example. Could you maybe share some other, real life stories of what's been happening in your ministry, the kinds of things that you're coming across, what you're kind of learning as you're interacting with people. I think that'd be really lovely to get some real life stories from you.
Yeah. Well, I have a few. I hope you don't wear. They're exciting stories mostly. I think I've given away more Bibles in the last 2 years or so than I ever have. In the 20, to 30 years I've been a Christian. It's pretty exciting that I've had that chance. I wonder that's actually through church as well as through the uni group. So sometimes I take some spare Bibles to uni, but it's actually not mainly uni. It's through church too. So I'm finding that exciting. Sometimes you see what happens with those Bibles, as in one of the girls I'm meeting up with, I see all the highlights she's got in her Bibles now, in her Bible now she's read it, or read different books of it. And sometimes you don't because they leave town or whatever. So that's exciting. So here's a couple of stories. So a young woman came to church. So I'll tell a couple of church ones, or tell another church one, and then I'll tell some uni ones. So a young woman came to church. She'd been invited by, or not invited actually, a friend of hers who she'd met on social media locally had happened to say in conversation that he goes to church. And so she said, I want to go too. And she didn't have a license, so he was the ride. And so she started coming along to church. Now, he's actually left town now, and we weren't really sure where he was at with Jesus, even the time he was with us. And she's still on the fringe of church and exploring. So that's pretty exciting. So this has been probably 2.5 years now that she's been on the fringe of church, exploring. The most fascinating thing about this story is what is compelling to her. So she likes the community, and she likes, probably for the want of better words, the morality and stability of Christians. That's what I've picked up from my chat with her. But she's strong-willed, so she has had to be a survivor. She's had to be strong in her life, and I think that her strong will hasn't been conquered by Jesus yet. But it's exciting that she's still there, and I'm always encouraged by the fact that God is still working in her. And yeah, that's through no and yeah, I'm excited that she's still there. One of the students that I work with, so I'll talk about some students now, she arrived at uni Bible study towards the end of last year, so she hadn't connected all year, and then arrived. She was from La Trobe, so she didn't know about the uni Bible study that was happening at CSU until a friend invited her. So she speaks English as an additional language, and she had never owned a paper Bible until she realized that we had some spares and asked me for one. And I felt so guilty because I was like, I can't believe that I wasn't on the front foot of that one. She actually led her first Bible study at uni Bible study only a few weeks ago. And it was really exciting to see her comprehension coming through. So her Bible is full of highlights. That's one of the ones that I'm so excited about. She hasn't really read much of the Old Testament yet, so she's actually super excited about coming into uni Bible study this term. We'll be doing a book. We're doing Jonah, so she'll get to read some of the Old Testament, and she's like super excited about that. So that's really good. She's from a background where her church denomination, even though her family do attend church, it's probably not going to help her a great deal with comprehending the Bible. So it's one of those things where she's got a lot of questions. She comes to uni Bible study because she's a Christian and she wants to learn, but she's not going to be assisted by church too much, I think. So she's still working on that one. Another student at uni, last year we had a student at the start of the year. She wasn't part of uni Bible study at all, and she was on quite a long placement for her course, and she bought herself a Bible online because she wanted to read it. So in the second half of the year, she rocks back up to uni, and she has a friend who's in uni Bible study who invited her to come along. She kind of had been starting to drop into their conversation stuff about Jesus and the Bible. And so I said to her friend who is in uni Bible study, it sounds like you need to invite her. So she did. So she connected with uni Bible study and was with us for 6 months. And in that time, she read the Bible. She read all of John's Gospel with her friend who had invited her to come along. She made a choice to follow Jesus. She graduated and moved 350 kilometers away, and didn't plug into a church straight away. She did read most of the entire Bible over the summertime, but her life has taken a really hard turn this year. So it's been quite hard to stay in touch with her. So and we found that really interesting, that it's been quite challenging to just do that over distance, but also over the bumps of life. So it's very exciting and also really hard at the same time. We had another student on campus. He was a little bit older than some of our other students, and he plugged in straight away into uni Bible study, wanting to learn. Also didn't have a paper Bible because he'd only ever read on his phone before that. And he was with us for the whole year. I wasn't really sure where he was at with Jesus, and by the end of the year, I was super excited about the fact that he would be back on campus next year, and I'd be maybe able to start to train him with some Bible reading skills a bit more closely. But he hasn't come back to campus, so we've lost touch with him entirely, and he lives in another state, so that's quite tricky as well. So I think distance is sometimes our nemesis with students also. So I hope you can see some of the common ground. Curiosity, I think, is a big one. Wanting to be in the Word, I think, with solid, like the wanting solid food, I think that's a pretty common ground. Maybe not with the young women from church yet, but we hope to get there. But also that discipleship of these young sometimes fledgling Christians is quite hard work. So I think part of the challenge comes from the fact that some of the ones who are coming from no Christian background they really have no understanding of the gospel or the Bible at all to start with. And so we start from nothing. And I think that's going to be a challenge for this generation to continue to meet the needs and work with and serve people who are coming from no knowledge of Jesus at all. So yeah, discipleship. I've found Glenn Scrivener's channel. He has a channel on YouTube. So if you're wanting a channel on YouTube that you think is good, he does a channel on YouTube called Speak Life. He's a bloke from the UK. But one of the things that he says is that discipleship is evangelizing Christians and evangelism is discipling non-Christians. And I really quite like that, because even if someone like one of the girls I mentioned has put their trust in Jesus, and I think that was really genuine and true, there's still a lot of gospel work that needs to happen in her life to bring that to fruition. And in the same way, so we don't ever leave the gospel behind when someone has come to Christ. It's continuing to build on that. So I think, yeah, the discipleship, I'm still working through how to do that well. Particularly with the students, I don't have a lot of ongoing opportunities, but in our churches, we have the chance to be alongside people, and that doesn't have to be in a formal, structured way. I think sometimes the less structured things can actually be super helpful, because it's more like living and walking and talking life together. That can probably be where you see modeled what it looks like to live as a Christian. For someone who's not come from a Christian background, that's very valuable. And in some ways, for the young woman I mentioned who did come to church and is still on the fringes, in some ways, I think it will be really good if she longs to be a Christian because of the people around her who she loves and sees it working in their lives. She sees that the gospel is good and then wants to know what it is. I think that's going to be helpful for her. Yeah. So there's a few ideas there, but I just want to say, if you're involved or you've had the opportunity to be walking alongside some young people, like it is actually hard and long work. I think that's one thing I want to say, and to persist in that and to keep persisting in that. The one thing that I keep coming back to is Philippians chapter 1 verse 6, that God begins the good work in people's lives, and he will bring it to completion. Sometimes I can't see the end of the journey, but God will know. So yeah, for the young man who came to church and left, and for the one we've lost contact with, I need to trust that God has got those ones, and trust that his church is working and that they're reaching out to those young people too. Yeah.
Thank you, Heather. That's so helpful. Something that just really strikes me with what you've said is I kind of reflect on maybe when I was a younger Christian, getting trained up, to disciple and evangelize others. I think some of the narrative I think that I took in at that time was, in a sense, here's the formula. Do you know what I mean? If you do these steps, you'll be able to bring someone to know Jesus, and then that's how you'll kind of integrate them into church and Bible study and maturity. And I love the way you've, I think, really helpfully highlighted the fact that that's just often not the case. Like the case, it's messy. People's lives
Yeah.
are complex, and things just come left of center, and as you say, people move away, or like there's a lot of complexity and unpredictability in terms of the way that people come to know Jesus and grow in him. But I love that reminder that it is God who is going to complete that work. And it's about us being faithful, in what's in front of us, but it won't always be, do you know what I mean, that nice little trajectory. I think for me, I had to almost unlearn some of that expectation. I think I felt that if it didn't look like that maybe I was doing something wrong. And I think I've just come to see, yeah. So I really love what you've shared there, just the reality of that, yeah, that ongoing kind of messy, persisting, having to be pretty tenacious, hanging there, being, yeah, flexible, yeah, as you're coming alongside people over the years, like that it can take someone to really, come to be established in Christ.
Yeah, so we never really want to be alone in that. So that's why I think it's so helpful that our churches work together to support each other, and the young adults we have among us. The valuableness of the conversations that you have with them, to take interest in their lives and stuff. It seems that they're extremely valuable. The ones I'm more concerned about from the uni perspective are when I know that their churches won't be doing that well, or when I assume, sometimes I assume, or when I suspect their churches won't do that well. However, God still has that, and the fact that they are curious and asking questions, good ones. So one of the students I mentioned who had English as an additional language. So she's come from a culturally Christian country background. So the idea that in Australia people would not automatically be Christians is actually quite troubling for her. I would say troubling. Yeah, troubling for her. So she has had to rethink what she thinks trusting Jesus is all about from square one. So it's brilliant that she's come to a position like this, and also she has quite a standing in the community. So I am praying that God will use her powerfully. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, Heather, a final question, but kind of, I guess, a fairly big question is, what can you share with us? Like, I guess, what advice can you give us about what you've seen working well in connecting with students, and yeah, what we should avoid doing? What have you seen not working well, or what are things that are not as helpful?
Well, I think in a technology saturated generation, you really can't beat face-to-face contact. So if at all possible, I think it's really helpful for getting young people together. They're pretty open to that, I would say. Sometimes it's hard to hit on what works well though. Like I think it's hard to figure out what, when works for us and them, but it's also hard to figure out how you deal with them longing for personal connection on one level, but also the generation we're talking about is somewhat de-skilled in terms of their ability to make connections with each other easily. So we would kind of say, oh, don't they want to just get together? They'll do that. And they kind of will once they know each other, but they actually don't know each other well, and they don't know how to make those relationships deeper sometimes. So particularly in my context, where all the young people, well, a lot of the young people have all been thrust together at uni. They come from little outlying towns or even from across states. So the breadth of uni Bible studies involvement is where they've come from is Alice Springs to middle of Tasmania at the moment. So like they don't know people, so they're wanting to make connections, but sometimes they're a bit de-skilled in being able to make those personal connections. So I think that would be one thing I would say, try if you can to make opportunities. It can just be inviting people around to your place or meeting them out. I think both of those things are good. My other thing I mentioned before about asking them what they're listening to and be curious about what they're watching and listening to, that goes for Christian young people as well as those exploring. Some Christian young people will, though, kind of have be deliberately cautious of the social media world, so they may have less to say, but that's also interesting to know. So and that's, you know, not bad. I don't think there's necessarily a moral stand on those things, but it's you'll actually have a far better idea if you go and watch some of the YouTube videos they're watching. You'll have a far better idea what they're wrestling with than just a single chat with them. Something else I was think is that if you happen to have involvement from church from a young person and you kind of get a gleaning that they might not have had much of a Christian background, well, even if you have a gleaning they have a Christian background, don't assume Bible knowledge. I think we can often fall into the trap of being of assuming too much. I've definitely done it before, where I've assumed that some things would be obvious to people. So I feel like sometimes I'm like the big stop button in all of our Bible studies, going, stop, explain where you got that from. Tell us what you mean about David and Goliath. Like when someone will well-meaningly make a comment, but we just need to always keep pressing this pause button to make sure everyone's on the same page, because there's often going to be at least one person in the room that's so grateful I did that. So yeah, so I guess not assuming. And it's a tricky juggle, like that is tricky. So if you happen to be running a young adults Bible study at church or something like that, if that's something our churches do, you may have the really well-versed Christian in there with the curious young adult who's not quite a Christian yet. And maybe most of what they know about Christianity is from the 5 sermons they've heard and the YouTube channel they've watched. So you've got this massive discrepancy. And my point would be at that to teach and train the Christian student to love and care for the one who is struggling or the one who may know less. So it's just a matter of making it a general principle of we don't talk with jargon, we don't assume, and we just be okay with being having questions. And maybe that means you don't get as deep as you'd like sometimes, but I think at other times it means that you actually have a more precise conversation, actually, because people actually all know what you're talking about. So yeah, that's kind of generally about Bible studies, I guess. Yeah. The other observation I've made, and I'm just cautious of, is that I'm wondering about the problem. It's not a problem, but we love the fact that young people are curious and perhaps are going to come to church. But we actually do need to be careful that we're having conversations with the young people who are curious and rocking up to church about where they stand with Jesus reasonably early on, so that we don't fall into too many assumptions, but also about we don't want them to float into church and not connect particularly well because no one's asked them those questions and then float out again. So discipling of young people who may be floating to church is probably going to look like having some really clear and really explicit conversations about why Christians go to church, about why Christians might use their money in different ways, and probably a bunch of other Christian living topics that we would usually think that people would pick up along the way, but there probably are going to be things that we need to have some more explicit conversations about. And sometimes you have someone who's particularly talented at having those conversations at church. I wouldn't count myself as one of them. I think I often stuff them up, but I think that that's just having someone who's got it in their mind, that's thinking that that's a helpful thing to make sure that at some point we have those conversations. Yeah, I don't know whether there's any follow-up questions from those points. Yeah, and I'm not necessarily thinking that like running a training course or something is going to cover those things, because each of those areas will be quite individual. But yeah, definitely having some clear teaching early on in their walk about those things is helpful. I have a number of students in the uni Bible study group that before they move to Albury are actually from Christian families that don't go to church. So that's a fascinating, like, it's not a big group, and I've got at least 3. So I'm finding that an interesting phenomenon that I'm watching, because I'm wondering whether, this is just probably a little bit off topic, but I'm wondering whether the why we go to church as Christians is not maybe explicitly taught in our churches, perhaps because we feel self-conscious about that. But yeah, I wonder whether we need to be a bit more clear for the sake of the next generation. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Mm.
Yeah. Are there any questions that, yeah, Cherie or Sharon, anything that, yeah, you're wanting to ask, or yeah, just any observations that you've got based on what we've been looking at?
Just from what you said, Heather, I'm wondering whether that same question is something we need to consider even for the older people coming to church, the ones who come in new, because often we don't want to put people off by being too nosy or too specific too early about, about them and their life and their beliefs.
Mm.
But if there is actually a cultural shift away from, with people, some people and some families identifying as being Christian, but not actually connecting well with other Christians in churches. I don't know. It's just something I'll be thinking about now.
Mm. I think you're right that it's not just young adults that are in that category. Clearly, the couple that I'm talking about, it's also their families. But I don't know all the background. I've just encouraged them to make decisions for themselves as young adults.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do actually know of other cases where older people who have come to church recently have also been in the situation of learning quite a lot off YouTube, and then coming into church, and then the process of discipleship looks long and messy, and but those explicit conversations needing to be had. Yeah, and you need to have them, because probably at that point your Bible reading skills haven't reached the point of maybe your commitment to Jesus yet. I'm kind of working this out as I go a little bit, but I think for a couple of the people that I'm thinking of, they've come to church and I think, yeah, they've committed to Jesus, but they probably still couldn't confidently read the Bible and understand it for themselves.
Yeah, I certainly saw that in the old liberal churches, that you could have people who were genuinely Jesus followers, but because the teaching was so poor and so sparse that there was Bible teaching, they would be doing that like on a starvation diet rather
Mm,
than on a healthy spiritual food.
mm, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, it's worth thinking about. The other thing that I noticed when you were talking about the people reading their Bible on their phone or whatever, and then there seemed to be a fair interest for the younger people to get a paper version. Do you think that's, having something we would sometimes assume that the younger people are just going to want electronic stuff, but you have seen that there's certainly some of them that actually prefer paper.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I would say anyone who has paper at uni Bible study uses it.
Okay.
as in if they've forgotten, they'll use their phone as a backup. But they prefer to bring their Bible to when I read the Bible with the one-to-one, they'll prefer to lug their Bible around at uni all day than to not have it if they've remembered it. Yeah. So I think actually that's a lovely gift for a young adult if you're trying to come alongside a young adult. That's a beautiful gift, because even if they have had a Bible that was given to them, in year 6 as a present or something, often, having something fresh and the new part of their lives, that's a great gift. Yeah, it's an investment really. So Dave and I don't mind doing that. Have to do our bulk order from Coorong every now and then. Yeah. That's a good question. And I do think they do prefer, the physical. I think in a technology-driven era, there's a few swings away from that we notice. They're very mindful of the amount of social media they consume sometimes. They're very mindful of balance, for want of a better, sometimes that's good because they're probably not going to be as obviously workaholic as other generations perhaps have been. But at the same time, the striving for balance can go the other way, where they're very cautious to jump in and serve, or they're not sure if it will stretch them too far, they're reluctant. So there is that balance that they're striving for balance, and so they don't always jump in immediately. So I find that interesting. Yeah. I would mention, if that's okay, one tool that I have found helpful to some extent and probably worth knowing about is, so Glenn Scrivener is the guy I mentioned earlier. His organisation in the UK have made an app called 321. So I'll just show you on my phone. So it's this one here. So the 321 app is actually an online course that introduces Christianity. So when you go into the app, you can see, scrolling down the side here, there's a few sections. It's actually done as an online learning course. So there's the introduction, and then all of these parts are actually little videos. So the videos most of them go for about 8 to 10 minutes. They have a couple of questions at the start to think about, a couple of questions at the end. But the idea is that they're actually designed for you to be able to, let's say, recommend to a friend. They put the app on their phone and then they can do it at their own pace. So it's all free. You need to sign up with an email address. So some people might feel worried about that, but it's actually just so that it tracks your progress on the course, so that it's an online learning kind of style thing. But we have run this. You can also run this as a church course. So we've run this at Albury Presbyterian Churches has run it a couple of times now, and I've run it once on campus this year. We didn't have any non-Christians come along when we ran it on campus, but I was looking at the room thinking this is really valuable for my students, because just for them to be able to articulate the gospel well to others, it kind of shows them illustrations that are quite helpful along the way. So yeah, the one thing they did say about it, which I found was interesting, was they said a 10-minute video is too long. So it's just another thing that you're tackling there. But at the same time, I still think it's a valuable, it's nice to, this is the kind of tool that we can use, because our online and our electronic interactions and our face-to-face interactions are very much merged these days. So even people of older generations than students are definitely having a chat with their friend and sending a photo, or having a chat with their friend, or organising something with their friend and then meeting face-to-face. This is how all of our lives work these days. So it's not surprising that having an online tool that works that way, where you can chat about it or watch it together, or you can recommend to a friend and then they watch it themselves. It's excellent. It's based on John's Gospel, and it's got excellent theology. It starts with the Trinity, which is surprising, but I actually found that super helpful when I was discipling the girl who became a Christian last year. Starting with the Trinity was actually super helpful for her, which I was like, wow, I'm a little bit blown away by that being helpful. But yeah, to talk about who God is at the start was great. Yeah.
That's really useful. Thanks, Heather. That's great. So we talked at at the start, hadn't we, Heather, about maybe just having a bit of time just being able to pray for young people that we know. It'd be good to pray for you, Heather, as well in your ministry. I'm thinking that before we do that, I might just turn off the recording. I think that will be helpful to to turn that off. So just before I do, just any last comments or questions, and then then we'll move into just doing some prayer together. Any last things you'd like to ask?
Well, not so much a question, but yeah, thank you for just giving us a chance to think through what it looks like for a young person to think about Jesus. That's been really helpful.
That's okay. I also find, like Anna was saying, she feels old now, but yeah, I really do. Like the students are challenging me to think differently. And I think that's been actually quite a privilege to have the chance to know a bit of their minds. It's certainly helped me at church as well to just kind of think, yep, it actually matters to have a simple conversation with a young adult at morning tea. It really matters. Like it's just a small thing. It's actually huge. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, that's really useful. And it's funny, like I'm just thinking, the older I get, like I think in some ways, I don't know, like whether it's a good analogy, but it's almost like there's an element that it's cross-cultural in a way, that for young people who have been brought up with social media and technology in a way that we didn't, like we did not grow up with those things. So we, as older people, we're introduced to them, but we've got, a generation now who don't, have not known life, without, all of the technology and social media and stuff. So it's just interesting to think about, how that shapes their culture and how they think. And I think that's been really helpful to hear that from you, Heather, in terms of what you're noticing about the way that culturally, that shapes some of the ways in which they learn and interact with ideas. I think that's actually fascinating to think about that. And then to think in a way, cross-culturally, like how can that then inform how I can connect with people in a way that's curious and interested and willing to learn in terms of how they see the world. I think, that's got me thinking, which is really, that's really helpful, Heather. Thank you.
That's actually brought to mind just one more thing, Anna. I think the temptation, for me is to think that I need to be across all of the things that they're thinking about. And I'm actually realized that that's just, well, first of all, it's impossible, but they never expect it. So because there is so much content out there in social media and on YouTube, they never expect anyone to be all across everything. So to be curious and to have never heard of the YouTube channel they mentioned that they say is huge is actually totally fine. So I think the being curious thing is much more important than knowing about it. And they may be a little bit surprised, but they're not going to be hugely surprised, and they'll be super happy to show you.
Absolutely.
So I think though, so don't feel the pressure of needing to know everything. And I think
that's
actually probably a better position to be in to not know everything and have them tell you.
That's right. That genuine curiosity, isn't it?
Yep.
And interest in things and being a learner. Yeah,
So
no, that's really good. I think
it
that's
means
really
that everyone can actually interact with young adults in a really valuable way, I think.
exactly just being genuinely interested and curious. And
And
you're right. It's not about knowing it all, because they don't expect, like, we're a different generation. Like they don't expect that. And as you say, there's something nice about the fact that if you're interested, and then they can teach us. And
and you might need to then go away and watch a bit of the channel there or listen to the podcast or something that they've just told you about. But that's one of the cool things about it. And that's where even our generation will interact like that, where we'll recommend things to each other and send a link. So they're very familiar with that. And so it's actually a great way of putting good resources in their hands if you've got good things to recommend. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, super helpful. All right, so I might just end our recording here. Just want to say, thank you everyone for if you're listening today online or in the future. Thanks so much, Heather, for just really lovely content. Like really, it's got me thinking. And I think that's really great just to kind of have your thinking stirred. So I really appreciate that.
Thanks, everyone.
I'll just press stop here.